Hello, welcome to today's Actuary Webinar, which is brought to you with the support of Mantle. As you can see today, we're focusing on pensions consolidation and asking the question, is it time to consider software as well as schemes? My name's Christian Doherty. I'm a business journalist. I've been covering the pension space for over 10 years. In that time, it's fair to say that the sector has undergone a great deal of change and disruption. Not only has regulation driven that change, but technology has also underpinned a lot of that innovation. And of course, the central theme of that change has been a move towards scheme consolidation. We just have to see the growth of master trusts and the vibrancy of the buyout market and the growing need for efficient run-on solutions. They're all working together to make that sort of theme come to life. But as schemes and members consolidate, it's important, I think, that we also consider this other question, which is what about the software infrastructure that supports the administration and actual operations of those schemes? Is it really fit for purpose in a world where schemes are undergoing so much change? So it's with that in mind that today we're going to look at the issue of tech consolidation and whether it's time to consider a reset and renewal of the technology that underpins your schemes. We'll touch on how we got here, where we are now, and perhaps most important, where we might be heading in the next few years. So luckily for us, we've got two experts here to guide us through that. Gavin Watts is the actuarial product owner at Mantle, and he's joined by Matthew Leatham, who is the actuarial solutions lead at Mantle. So the way it's going to work is these two guys are going to deliver today's presentation, which should roughly run to around between 30 and 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for a post-match Q&A. And with that in mind, I'd urge you to please get involved by submitting your questions in via the Q&A box on the screen. These events are always more engaging, and I think people get more out of them when we get some audience participation. So I'll just say it once, but don't be shy. As a final piece of housekeeping, we'll shortly be making today's event available post-broadcast. So we'll be sharing a link with that with you later on. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Gavin and Matthew to give us today's presentation. Guys.
Brilliant. Thanks, Christian. So what are we going to look at today? I think you did a great introduction there, Christian, but let's just recap quickly. Look at the scheme consolidation parallels, what's going on in the market and how does that relate to technology. Matthew's then going to take over, run you through what does a consolidated technology solution look like? How does that differ to what you might currently have within your business? I'll then be looking at the business case. So we're all going to agree it's a great idea once Matthew's finished, but how do we actually get that over the line? And then, as Christian says, we'll leave some time at the end for you to test us with some gnarly questions, I'm sure. So you can't start any pensions webinar these days without kind of playing pension scheme bingo. And I think at the top of those, you have to mention mini budget and DB funding code. And I'm absolutely falling into that trap. I'm going to say the same thing. So over the last few years, we've seen surpluses or deficits for most schemes kind of disappear and surpluses arise for sometimes the first time that they might have seen them in 10, 15 years. Those kind of positions of how do I maintain technical provisions have been rapidly pushed to one side. And we're all thinking about these new surpluses that a lot of us have on solvency positions, thinking either about run on or going to market and buying out through a BPA provider. That combined with the DB funding code, which has again moved that dial away from, well, technical provisions are fine, but how are you going to get to a point of self-sufficiency and what is your long-term journey for the scheme, means that trustees and companies are really thinking about where are we going to end up in a way that just wasn't mainstream thinking 4 or 5 years ago. The pension scheme bill is also bringing kind of extra thinking to light, particularly around the idea of really driving forward member outcomes in terms of wherever your scheme ends up, making sure that members are front and center, be that run on with efficient use of surplus, or be that kind of through the BPA market, and particularly stuff around professional trustees, making sure that we're really delivering great outcomes for members. So what does all of this mean in terms of the pension scheme or the pension scheme sphere? We talked about consolidation, and consolidation really means heading to one of these three locations, which is going to be the case for the vast majority of the schemes. And the vast majority of schemes are probably getting here within a fairly short time horizon. So on the left, we've got our buyout, the traditional destination, I would say, for your pension schemes, putting all the liabilities to an insurer. We've got some of the new consolidator vehicles, so you have super funds, your master trusts, or run on. So let's keep it in the hands of the trustees of the employer and find a way to make those surpluses and innovative thinking really work for the benefit of the members. As the schemes consolidate into these three buckets, there's a number of challenges that come up. Some of these challenges are going to be more relevant for different parts of this sort of spectrum of these destination states, but I think all of them have some relevance in some form. So I sort of start on the left and think about capacity. If we think we've got the entire pension scheme market that was once run primarily out of in-house pension providers or through employee benefits consultants, third-party administrators, that's now moving to one of these three destinations. So there's an awful lot of administrative and liability transfer going on. In terms of capacity, the buyout market's seen some new entrants from insurers, but there's still more deals out there than there is insurer capacity. So finding ways to be able to manage that is going to be key as we move forward over the next 3 years. Diseconomies of scale, one of my favorite sort of terms from my GCSE or A level economics. This kind of basic concept of to do one thing is really hard. It's very bespoke. To do a few more becomes a little bit easier. You then hit that sweet spot where everything's great and you're kind of hitting a sensible number. You can make things quite efficient. And then there's that tipping point where you reach the next scale again. And the things that were working well for the tens or low hundreds stop working for the thousands or millions. And I think that's the danger that we've got here. With all of this transfer going through, how are these kind of these three destination vehicles in the middle of your screen able to take on that transfer? Do the kind of tactical solutions that I always call them, your kind of spreadsheet models, they may have worked fine for a couple of schemes, but as you're starting to really increase that capacity, your technology is really going to take a hammering, and your operations, and how are we going to be able to manage that? Cost control, I've got this on the run-on side because I think if you are going down a run-on, the whole idea is that you're going to be able to work in a different way to the insurer, generate additional surpluses that are going to benefit both the member and the sponsoring employer. You don't want those to be eroded by out of control costs. Even if you're looking at a kind of fairly stable run on kind of without thinking about generating excess surpluses, it's even more important that those costs don't spiral and erode all of that additional value that you can create by running a scheme on. Down at the bottom, we've got competition and service delivery. I think competition exists between the three states and within the three states. So the improved funding position does mean that whereas a lot of pension schemes thinking or trustees thinking about endgame solutions, affordability was probably ranked number one, then there was a huge gap, and then came everything else. I think with larger surpluses in the market, our trustees can be much more discerning about where they put their pension scheme. So being able to stand out, being able to prove that you can deliver, being able to deliver great service and ultimately great outcomes for members becomes pivotal to all that they do. So that's the background, and now's the ask. So these are the challenges coming down. As someone either in the buyout space, the consolidation space, or the run-on space, these challenges can be either good things. If you rise to them, there's a chance to really kind of ensure these great outcomes for members, win new business, and do great things. But there's also challenges. Fail to tackle these, and you're going to get left behind. So the real question that we're going to try and answer today is going to be around the schemes are consolidating into that blue band. What does your pension, what software need to do? Does that also need to consolidate to meet the challenges that I've outlined on this slide? To take us through that, I'm going to hand over to Matthew, who's going to walk us through the technology landscape and how that changes under consolidation.
Cool. Thanks very much, Gavin. So first of all, let's take a look at your technology ecosystem. At first glance, the diagram that's just appeared on screen probably looks quite complex, and that's intentional. These systems are complex. And to understand what's going on, let's quickly break it down into two simple concepts: components and links. The components are each of the individual boxes you see. Each component represents a distinct area where work gets done or data is stored. This could be a major piece of software you've bought from a third-party vendor. It could be a system you've built in-house, or it could even be a structured manual process. The links are the lines connecting these boxes. Each link represents the process or technology that joins two components together, allowing data and information to be transferred between them. Now, here's the key point. As simple as this map of components and links appears, or as complex as this map of components and links appears for many of you, this is likely a highly simplified view of what's really happening in your organization. If you're lucky, your ecosystem will resemble a well-organized spider's web with clear connections and discernible logic. However, for many established organizations, it can feel more like a tangled ball of string, complex web of interdependencies that has grown organically over years or even decades. So let's break down into a bit more detail what we're looking at here. So we have different types of components and different types of links. So the first component we have are going to be vendor products. These are off-the-shelf software solutions that you buy from third-party suppliers. This can be your administration system, your actuarial evaluation platform, or maybe even a CRM system. We have in-house software, which is generally a bespoke system that your team's built and maintained over the years. It could handle a unique business process that couldn't be addressed by a vendor product. We have tactical solutions. Tactical solutions are typically management speak for quick fixes or workarounds. A classic example here is going to be a small spreadsheet or a database that's built to bridge the gap between two other systems. They're functional, but can generally be fragile and in some cases are a nightmare for risk departments. We also have manual processes. This represents work that's done by people. It can be anything from data entry and running reports to physically moving files or performing calculations. Then all of these are connected by the links. We have integration or API links, which are modern automated ways that various systems can speak to each other. We have tactical and SFTP links, which can be scheduled file transfer process between systems, often a nightly batch process. We have robot and AI links, which represents the use of automation tools that mimic human actions to make decisions. And lastly, probably the most common one in a lot of cases, we have manual links. So this is the human element of manually taking data from one system and inputting it into another. Now, each of these individual sources, each of these individual components in your ecosystem can be a source of pain. Gavin, are you able to click the next bit of the animation, please? Yeah. But these pains don't happen in isolation. They're often linked together in a bit of a mini chain reaction. So let's test your imagination a bit. Imagine that the pensions regulator decided to introduce a new funding code. Really stretching the imagination here, but it's the perfect example of a new requirement. On the surface, you might look at it and think that the change would only affect your actuarial valuation system, but let's see how it ripples through the ecosystem and exposes all the other sources of pain. The first thing you have to consider is integration. The goal of integration really is to create like a seamless whole process, but the reality is that each component will have its own rules and its own data formats that it has to use. Therefore, getting them to talk to each other can be a significant and ongoing project in itself. While you might initially think that the funding code only affects your valuation system, the data needed for the new calculations needs to be gathered from your administration platform, fed into your actuarial models, and then results need to be reflected in your reporting tools. Each one of those components is a potential point of failure. Not only do you need to consider the impact on the valuation system itself, you also need to consider the impact on all of the links and all of the components downstream from it. This is often made worse by overlaps. You might find that you're repeating the same process multiple times in different places. So think in your organization the number of different ways you calculate a present value for members' benefits. You're going to calculate it in your valuation system. You might have a transfer value calculator that calculates the present value of benefits, and you're going to have countless spreadsheets as well, most likely, potentially built by different people that all calculate a present value in a slightly different way. The more overlaps you have, the less efficient you are and the more risk you have of creating inconsistency between them. Let's think about infrastructure too. Many of the components we have, either vendor products or in-house software, are likely to be legacy systems. The teams maintaining them are probably just in the sort of status where they're keeping the lights on. They don't really have much funding for any more than just doing essential maintenance and making sure that the system just continues to work. And whenever you show up with a new requirement for them that has emerged from the funding code, they might lack the budget, the resources, or even the system capabilities to respond effectively. I've heard many a story of old bits of software that are maintained by someone that is effectively in semi-retirement, who needs to be called in just to fix one bit of the system or keep it going. Your old infrastructure might not even be able to handle new requirements either, even if the team did have the capability to integrate them. And finally, this one's perhaps the most frustrating for a lot of people, continuous improvement. With teams managing these systems stuck in a bit of a reactive state, there's no real capacity there for proactive improvement. So you and your team might have come up with a great idea. Wouldn't it be brilliant if there was a button in this bit of software that would automate this report? But you might struggle to build a business case for it. And how do you really quantify the savings for this button to convince your management team to sort of hire in someone else who can work on this legacy system to build that? And ultimately, what you end up with is so many of these valuable improvements you and your team come up with get stuck on a perpetual wish list. You end up with a lot of technical debt, and the systems become even more inefficient and painful to use over time. As well as the components being a source of pain, the links can be a source of pain as well. So continuing on with the thoughts of the new funding code, it doesn't just change what happens inside each of the boxes, it changes how information needs to flow between them as well. Suddenly you need to move new data fields and perform new types of calculations throughout the ecosystem. This has an immediate impact on efficiency. Many of these links rely on old technology like a nightly SFTP file transfer, and a lot of them will also rely on manual processes to extract data from one system, map it, and upload it into another system. These processes were already slow, and whenever you introduce new complex demands, they become even greater bottlenecks. We also have transposition risk. Imagine an analyst under pressure having to manually copy new results from your valuation system into a spreadsheet that calculates the rest of the requirements for a report under the new code. What's the chance that they accidentally paste data from the wrong column? What's the chances they mistype a critical number or save over the wrong file? Every single manual link creates the opportunity for these small human errors that become a major source of operational risk. Then you have to consider security. Every time you're moving sensitive member or financial data across these links, it forces you to ask some very uncomfortable questions. Is that old file transfer process encrypted properly? When a user emails that tactical quick fix spreadsheet, is it secure? Who has access to the shared network drive where the data lands? Each link ultimately is a potential vulnerability, and by forcing more data to move between systems, this just increases your organization's attack surface. And finally, all this is wrapped up in change management. To implement the funding code correctly, you can't just update one link in isolation. You have to coordinate a complex sequence of changes between the team managing the various systems, bringing in perhaps change management professionals, making sure that everyone is on board, because one small error in the chain, one link that isn't ready on time, effectively breaks the whole end-to-end process. So it's a high-risk coordination effort that can all be triggered by one simple change. Next slide, please, Gavin. So, animation worked, happy days. So having identified the sources of pain, the natural question is, what do we do about it? How do we move from the tangled ball of string to something that's a bit more streamlined? So this brings us to the goal of technology consolidation. The core idea here is to strategically look at the overlaps and the connections we identified in the previous slide, where you have multiple components performing similar functions or relying on the same data. Those are your opportunities to consolidate. It's really important here to stress that the goal isn't to consolidate everything into one single monolithic system. It's about making smart strategic choices about what to consolidate. The after diagram we have here on the left of this slide shows that you can take several of the original blocks and merge them into a single, more powerful component. But you'll notice that we still retain some distinct in-house products and manual processes. So the aim is to take the areas of greatest inefficiency and risk, simplify what makes sense, and keep the specialist tools that still do their job well. As a bit of a practical example here, many of you will have separate platforms that carry out your core administration, actuarial valuations, payroll process, and accounting. But if you think about it, all of these functions are usually powered by very similar data, like member details, salaries, contributions, pension amounts, and so on. So the question is, could a single modern solution drawn from one central source of data power all of these functions? Imagine replacing 4 or 5 separate vendor and in-house systems, all the tactical spreadsheets and manual links, stitching them together with one integrated platform. That's the technology payoff that we're talking about here. Can you press the animation, please, Gavin? Yes, thanks. So when you get this right, consolidation gives you some significant benefits. Simpler process flows, you have fewer moving parts, fewer handoffs, so your end-to-end process becomes much cleaner and easier to manage. You have fewer components. This is a huge one. It means fewer systems to maintain, fewer infrastructures to patch and upgrade, an overall smaller attack surface from a security perspective. And from a commercial standpoint as well, it means you're only managing 1 or 2 key vendor relationships instead of 5 or 6, which is much more cost effective and simple to do. Lastly, we have fewer handoffs. So every time data is handed from one person or system to another, you introduce risk and inefficiency. Consolidation minimizes these handoffs, reducing the chance of manual errors or data breaches. Crucially, though, this doesn't have to be a single seismic change that disrupts your organization. Consolidation project can and often should be a gradual process. You might want to look at your areas of inefficiency and decide to tackle one at a time, proving that you're adding value there, and then moving on to the next. Make it a journey of continuous improvement rather than a one-off big bang project. One thing here that I want to draw a bit of attention to as a bit of a warning is that you only really get these benefits if the new system is truly integrated. So you have to be incredibly careful that the consolidated technology you're adapting isn't just a shiny wrapper that helps hide the tangled ball of string that was there before. Some all-in-one solutions are actually just a collection of separate, loosely connected modules that have been acquired over time. True consolidation re-engineers and simplifies the process from the ground up. It doesn't just hide the complexity behind a new dashboard, and without deep, genuine integration, you haven't actually removed all of your sources of pain, you've just put them behind a curtain. So let's bring this all together in a bit of a real world example. Gavin, if you move on to the next slide. Oh, we're already there. So what you see here is what the process for calculating the transfer value looked like whenever I started my career just over 10 years ago. The key takeaway here is that this process involves a number of different tools, separate databases, tactical calculation solutions, and several manual handoffs. Each box and every arrow here is a step that introduces extra operational risk and inefficiency into your process. So one of the first things we think about whenever we're considering how to improve a process like this is often automation. Automation focuses on the transitions, the arrows between the boxes, and finding a way to make them faster and more reliable. For example, if you're using an Access database and calculating the transfer value in Microsoft Excel, maybe you can write a macro to pull the data from the database into your spreadsheet. Consolidation, however, looks at reducing the number of components and steps in the process, because with an automated process, you ultimately still have a lot of components to manage. Gavin, if you had the animation again, please. So what we now see is potentially what a transfer value process can look like at the minute. There's far fewer nodes, far less data moving, a lot less security risks. There's automation that's effectively intrinsic within the new process as well that helps to improve quality. And there's steps that are effectively removed entirely as they just happen within the single system. So for example, there's nothing here referencing workflow like we did in the original process. And this really gets to the heart of it. Automation helps you run a complex process a lot more efficiently. Consolidation replaces that complexity, removing the need for risky transitions in the first place and delivering a fundamentally simpler, safer, and more robust outcome. And I think with that, I'm handing back to Gavin to sort of hopefully teach you all how to make a business case to your organizations for this.
Thanks, Matthew. So yeah, teach you to make a business case is a bit grand. I think what I'm going to try and do is hopefully Matthew's convinced you why consolidation makes perfect sense from a tech perspective. All of those existing pain points that we highlighted and how you can get rid of them by just simplifying your technology landscape. So I've called this a business case, but really does it make sense for you? It's as much a checklist internally to think, is this something we should be proceeding with? And this tends to be my change process for most things, which is figure out what we want to do, figure out why we want to do it, and figure out all the risks that are kind of stopping us or the reasons why not. And hopefully what we're going to see is that middle column of whys is going to outweigh the column why not, and then this thing makes sense. So let's dive into the what. I've called this redraw the map. So if you think about Matthew had those two great slides with that complex ball of string or that spider's web of software, and then we simplified it with fewer boxes and fewer links. That's really what I'm talking about with redrawing the map. Trying to figure out which bits of my existing process I want to replace and in what configuration. So there's a few places you might want to start here. I think the pain points are a great place to start. What's the problem where are the existing problems that you've got within your business? Where are those points of inefficiency? Where's that semi-retired developer that's kind of constantly on your key man risk and kind of keeping you up at night? Are those the bits that you can consolidate? And then also, I think from the positive perspective, what are you doing really well? What's the bit of technology that's really giving you a competitive advantage and you should really be leaving alone? So I think once you've identified those two, you can get a sense of natural bedfellows, places that work together, the bits that are painful and you want to replace, and the bits that are working well and you can leave alone. I think the next stage is probably a decent decision around buy, adapt, or rebuild. And just in terms of what those three words I'm trying to get at, buy, license from a third party, adapt, can you take that complex web and without doing what Matthew warned us against in terms of just pulling a curtain around something that's complex, can we adapt it so it is truly integrated? Can we rebuild it or kind of modify it so that it really does work? In terms of the rebuild, do you just start from scratch? And I think what's going to drive this is your kind of company's view on, do you have a dedicated technology wing? Do you have the desire to cooperate in the technology space long term? Is proprietary software something that's core to your DNA as a business? I think that's key. And on the buy side, is what you want really specialist? Does the product exist? Can you do a market review and is it out there? I suppose there's the partnership option that you can always look at for kind of going somewhere in the middle. But I think getting a sense of which of these routes is important would be really helpful. Transition plan is absolutely critical. The complex web that we've got isn't complicated because of poor design or happened by accident. It's because what the workings of a pension scheme, an insurance product, whatever we're doing is naturally complicated. So moving off it is going to be a big piece of work. So I think your transition plan needs to be really well defined in terms of what are those staging posts. Matthew made a great point about, do you need to do consolidation all in one go? I think the answer is probably no. And doing it in one go has some benefits, but it has a lot of risks. So perhaps thinking about, is there something what's top of my pain list? Have I found a software product that I want to move on to? And can I get that painful bit in first, find the benefits, and then build on it over time? That allows you to prove that the software works, move in a sensible way that gets you from where you are to a consolidated solution over time. We'll talk about transition risks in the why not, and we'll come into some of those mitigating strategies. So before that, let's dive into some of the whys. So the why is all about benefits, right? Technology costs are going to be a big one. Matthew talked about infrastructure for each of your components, each one of those blobs that we had on screen. Consolidating your technology so you have fewer blobs, now they may be bigger, is likely to reduce the amount of overheads that you're paying, right? You're not renting the same sort of server space multiple times. You haven't got the same support staff that are kind of on each of the products. You haven't got the same testing. You haven't got all of those kind of overheads that go with it. You should be finding some economies through bundled services. The flip side of that is your kind of people benefits. So you would hope through consolidation, particularly that example Matthew gave about transfer value calculations, we've dramatically cut down the people effort in producing a transfer value. So that's reducing our cost per process and really allowing to free our people up to do more value add work, to kind of take on that new business and do more with what we've got. I think there's also efficiency benefits that come from sort of your kind of backroom team or your overheads team. I talked about testing under the technology costs. Every time there's a new thing that comes out, we need our business teams to test it, figure out what it means, help write the process manuals, help guide your users kind of through. And that complex patchwork of individual components means that, as Matthew said, that interdependency, I'm changing one thing, I need everyone to figure out if that's going to have ripple effects downstream. Under a consolidated approach, you can dramatically reduce that by the fact it's inherently part of the same thing. You can kind of know what's happening with this data when it leaves your particular kind of module within your consolidated system, because it's fundamentally built the same. So that level of rigor and testing that you need to do on a business side is going to be dramatically reduced. Linking strategy is key. I started this slide with what are the challenges that mean that pension consolidation and technology consolidation go hand in hand. It's really important to think about what you're trying to do. If you are an in-house pension scheme with aspirations to buy out within the next 2 to 3 years, clearly a consolidation case for your technology isn't going to fly. By the time you get through kind of implementing it, you're going to be handing it off to insurer and you've spent a lot of money for not much benefit. Conversely, if you're thinking about a long-term run-on solution where you are thinking that you're going to be running this thing for 10, 20 years, and what you want to do is take more of this on, you want certainty over costs, you want to reduce risk, then all of this plays to that business strategy. And I think that's key in terms of why would I go through the pain, is to be able to point out how it's going to help you win that new business, deliver on those strategic goals. Risk reduction is the final key piece. Again, I'm going to come back to that example that Matthew used of your semi-retired developer. It strikes a chord with me, right? I've seen a few of these systems over the years, and this kind of, what's the stuff that keeps you awake at night? There's so many systems that I've kind of been involved with, which is that next Microsoft patch going to be the one thing that pushes that legacy system over the edge and means I finally have to invest in upgrading that and having to do it in quite short time horizons? Do you have some risk coming down the track, kind of coming down the road? I think it's links to transition plan. Do you know you have to exit a data center? Are you doing a big piece of software migration? Do you have a key license that's coming to expire and you're worried about the kind of renewal costs of going through it? All of this consolidation piece can be looking at the existing problems you've got and taking them off the table. I think you could run through any of Matthew's pain points from that kind of first slide and think about a way to quantify them and bring them to life. So hopefully there's now loads of reasons to do this why. So let's look at the why not. This image I've got is a broken link in a chain. I think consolidation could also be thought of concentration, and my actuarial exams would tell me that concentration in general is a bad thing, right? Putting all your eggs in one basket, as it were, in terms of software. I think there's probably two counterpoints I'd make to this. I think it's true, you've got fewer big components doing the bulk of the heavy lifting, but that also has some benefits. So one being having this disparate web of lots of individual components. Is that spreading your risk or is that increasing your risk? Because you're only as strong as the weakest link. Hence my slightly dubious broken link in a chain icon here. If one of those components goes down, the ripple effect may be huge. It may pretty much stymie your whole operation. So have you changed the risk by going to one? I might argue that actually having one integrated system, one vendor that knows, and that vendor may be internal or external, having someone that understands the journey of their product and set up the testing accordingly, it may be less likely that you've got a failure coming down because the links in that chain are much more well understood and again, naturally integrated within it. I think the other key piece is around risk mitigations. So under that patchwork of multiple solutions, I would imagine that your risk register is going to score some things highly and require some oversight. Other things will be scored lower and require less, but you're still going to have a lot of them. And that's going to sap your management kind of time and effort to monitor. If you've got fewer really critical important components in your kind of jigsaw puzzle, you can spend much more time getting comfortable with what are the contingency strategies, what is the testing process, how am I protecting myself against any potential outages, what would happen if we did this. That's much easier when you are dealing with one component than dealing with that patchwork of 16 or more, as we saw on the previous slide. Transition risks are going to be the big one. Moving away from a complex web to something simpler sounds great, but you know that there's going to be a difficult change process along the way. So how can we make that work in a smart way? I think this is probably most of your traditional project management, change management controls that you can put in. Can you do this in a phased approach? How are you going to work with pilots? Is there a transition partner that's done this a lot that you can bring in expertise, either in terms of doing some of the legwork or helping you in terms of a really coherent plan? Is there a way that you can do this in phases? At what point are you backing out existing software? Have I got overlap kind of time periods? Have I got sufficient go, no go milestones that can mean I can do a bit of consolidation? And then if the business case starts making sense, can I lock in what I've got in a way that makes sense? I think all of those are great levers if you can find them that can still give you some of those consolidation benefits without locking you into a multi-year high risk kind of, certainly from an operational perspective, plan of where you want to get to. The final one I want to cover is this kind of do nothing approach. So okay, I don't like the sound of consolidation. Well, what then? What is our plan? What is the plan B? And are we being fair about what the costs of do nothing really are? So we've got kind of, maybe we've got this big data migration that's coming up that we know is going to be painful. We wouldn't have to do that, for example, if we did a consolidation approach. Are we equating that saved effort within our business case? What are the risks that we've talked about in risk reduction, and how are we quantifying those? And are we happy that they're acceptable to us as a business? And the link to business strategy. If our business strategy is to grow in terms of adding more schemes, as an insurer, for example, I want to write more business, and quite frankly, my IT is holding me back from doing that. How are we going to write that business without making a change of this order? Maybe that's consolidation, maybe it's something else, but I think the do nothing approach is important to challenge. If not this, then what? And as I say, hopefully through this, we've kind of preempted some of the risks, come up with a compelling reason as to why we can manage them, and then the why stands strong enough as a reason to move. So I've got two things I want to talk about before we move on to Q&A, and they, I think, are what I call the elephants in the room. So the first one, I think, again, if we were playing pensions webinar bingo, these are probably two more terms that you'd expect to see, and perhaps we've done well to get to this point without mentioning them. So the first is data, and I think the specific question is, my data's got some holes in it. Is consolidation even an option? And I suppose my answer here is yes, but a slightly hedged answer. It's yes, because you still have all of those problems that we identified, and you're going to have to solve them at some point. That do nothing approach, right? You can still get benefits from having a modern architecture, removing that key person risk, getting some efficiency benefits in terms of fewer manual handoffs that are going through. You may not be able to get to Matthew's green kind of boxes of how you could do a transfer value if your data is a bit patchy, but you can certainly find a lot of benefits elsewhere. The kind of yes, but part comes in. If your data is frankly horrible, then moving administration systems beforehand starts to look kind of dubious, right? Do I want to move that horrible data only to do a fix later? Maybe, but you're going to spend a lot of time moving data that's ultimately going to get changed. That feels like doubling up costs. If you're in the middle of a data rectification exercise and you're thinking about moving, does that make sense? I think probably, but you want to make sure that you're thinking about that final data being ready to go into the existing system and ready to go into a new system. Those data sets may look quite different, but doing that work at the same time is going to avoid any overheads in terms of redoing work. A lot of that kind of putting the pen down, picking the pen up, that wasted effort. So thinking about the transition that way. I think that probably covers me on this one. Oh, I've managed to skip forward. So the other bit on data AI, on the elephants in the room is AI. I said there was another one that I'd mention. I've probably managed to get to 40 minutes through a webinar without talking about AI in any significant detail. So probably no surprise that it's going to come up now. And the question I think that's probably quite likely to come up is, can agentic AI just make all this stuff go away, right? Can I get that complex web that Matthew showed us on the second sort of slide and just throw AI at it and make it all work? And I think my hedged answer again is maybe, but. So where AI is at the moment, and this is a rapidly moving area, I think there's a few things that will make any AI struggle. One of them is going to be infrastructure and hardware. Really old, locked up systems that just don't have those nice, I almost want to call them tendrils, right? They're sort of the API links or the interfaces to let you go in and play with them. If they're really locked down because the infrastructure is so old, you are going to struggle to find AI that's going to play nice with those. Similarly, what's the runtime like? Can you kind of have a AI that's able to test that system, to play with that system, or is it just going to grind to a halt? I think the other piece is where AI is very strong is where you can define a process. So that complex web, that complex map that we talked about being natural as a part of the work that we do is complicated. Can you sufficiently articulate that to agentic AI that means that it can navigate all those interactions in a way that makes sense and makes sense in a way that is reliable, right? We're often dealing with individual members' benefits here. We need to get this right for the most part. We can allow for some approximations within actuarial work, but we need to be confident with what we're doing and how much of that can we do with AI with such a complicated process. My sense is where we are at the moment is that the AI would probably be very good at doing kind of in an 80-20 rule. There's 80% of your work that takes you 20% of the effort. And I think it's probably that 80% of the work that takes 20% of the effort, the AI will let you go a little bit faster. But it's not going to tackle the 20% of the work that takes 80% of the effort. And that's where your big operational efficiencies lie. So I think in that context, maybe but is about as strong as I would go. I still think that by moving to a consolidated approach, AI has got much more of a fighting chance to really accelerate what you can do compared to your fragmented approach that you may have at present. I think that's all I want to say on that. So if we come back to takeaways, hopefully by now you've seen the parallels between consolidating software and consolidating and the consolidation of the pension scheme market. Matthew's walked us through why this is a great idea, why you've got a lot of risks in this fragmented approach and how they can be reduced. And hopefully I've given you some takeaways in terms of, is this something for us? What are the key sort of pointers, the key checklists I should be going through in terms of making this a viable option? So with that, I think, Christian, I'll bring you back in. Have we had any questions come in?
We have had a few. Thank you. Thanks, Gavin. Thanks, Matthew. Fantastic stuff. Great to get your insight there. So yeah, we've got time just for a couple of quick questions. So let me have a look now. So here's one which cuts right to the chase, I suppose you could say. I mean, how practical is it to think that you can buy or build one system that's going to cover all aspects of running a pension scheme? Obviously, there's a skeptic in the audience, but it's a worthwhile question. I mean, how would you address that, I guess?
Gavin, I think I'll tackle this one just to give you a little bit of a rest after the last section. So ultimately, kind of, if you want to buy or build one system that covers the entirety of running the pension scheme, that's very unlikely. So if it was to take kind of two things that are very much at the opposite side of running the pension scheme, you've got trustee meetings and governance on one side, and actually doing the day-to-day administration and the calculation automation that underpins that at the other side. Very unlikely you're going to be able to buy or build a system that does all of those things. Whenever we showed the example earlier, we didn't show a monolithic system that did everything. We talked about finding the right areas to consolidate, and that's ultimately what you want to do. You want to look for the risky areas, the areas that have overlaps, the areas that are linked to each other, and try and work out how to consolidate them and build it into a bit of a gradual change process. And linking back to Gavin's buy, build, or adopt question on I think it was the why in the business case. Ultimately, kind of if you're looking at one bit of software, so say if you're looking at replacing your admin system and you were deciding whether you wanted to build a new admin system or buy an admin system, I would be looking at finding a system or building a system that is ready-made to integrate into other processes. So can my admin system also do payroll, for example? That's the kind of thing I want to be thinking whenever I'm making these decisions. Does that answer it?
Yeah, I think so. That's pretty comprehensive. Anything else you'd add on that one, Gavin?
No, other than I think the point about, yeah, do you want to do everything? I suppose, like, it's kind of, I think we talked in our original kind of what does consolidation look like. We didn't go for one blob that covered everything. You will have everyone will be doing things slightly differently. Everyone will have their strengths, their stuff that they're doing really well. I think a kind of phrase of throwing baby out with the bathwater sort of applies here, right? Keep the stuff that you're doing really well and focus on the stuff that's kind of harder for you.
That makes sense. Okay, so another question here, which goes to as you say, you did well to get through the 40 minutes of the presentation without mentioning AI, but it's reared its head as it always does. So the question is I think you've underplayed the potential impact of AI in this space, and surely this must be central to a consolidated technology stack solution. You alluded to this, and that maybe but answer is possible theme is an interesting way to address it. I mean, how would you sort of answer that question? Who's from someone who's clearly sees AI as playing a sort of maybe a more central role?
Yeah, I'll go again here, Gavin, if that's all right.
Yep.
So I think AI has huge potential in pensions, but probably also in wider actuarial work as well. As something that I've actually spent quite a lot of time, since the kind of like real emergence of large language models and generative AI over the past couple of years, trying to work out what the best use of it is, because I do think it has huge potential. One of the things that is a struggle for AI at the minute, might not be in the future, but at the minute is generally like context length. So take the example where you're trying to use AI to help improve your communications with members or policyholders. And the data you hold on that member is fragmented across a variety of systems, spreadsheets, PDF files from like letters or certificates that have been returned, manual processes, phone notes. So you're going to feed those into your AI, and you might be feeding it the same data from two different systems, and it has to interpret which is the correct one. And that's something where it's quite prone to give you unreliable results, and it's quite prone to give you unreliable results in a bit of a black box way that's difficult to interrogate. So I actually think of this in a way that kind of like with consolidation, it speeds up your way of getting towards a single source of truth. And a single source of truth for your data is what really supercharges AI, and that's what gives you the big benefits of it. So things like highly personalized member communications, predictive analytics, maybe to identify at-risk members who are contacting you and escalate them as high-risk members, treat them a bit differently, as well as like predicting things that are upcoming in workflows. Yeah, there's a lot of potential in a wide range of areas here, and yeah, it's a case of setting up your ecosystem in order to be able to take the most advantage of it you can.
Would you echo that, Gavin?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And I think the only probably point I'd add on top of it is kind of this idea that AI the temptation, I think, where you see a lot of businesses fall down on AI is this concept of here's this thing that we struggled with for years, and we had lots of smart people that have tried to solve it and we couldn't, and we threw AI at it because that's going to be the solution. And those tend to be the ones that certainly at the moment aren't aren't flying, right? It's the stuff that I do this day in, day out, or I do this with the context that Matthew's describing, and we can make that a lot quicker. So I think it's can we make everything feel like the latter, the easy stuff? And I think consolidation of technology will help get you there. And then that really gives you the springboard to make that AI play much more powerful. And there's no reason, right, when you're looking for new providers and thinking about that solution, AI absolutely should be on your list of, are you looking to the future? How is AI going to play nice with this? Am I setting myself up for that? But I think, yeah, the concept of putting AI onto that complex map is still, I think, probably a bridge too far.
Yeah, it's one of those things, Gavin. I hear quite a bit when I'm speaking to people about this. Like there's almost two schools of thought, where one is that AI will solve everything, and the other school of thought is that AI won't solve anything. The reality sits somewhere in the middle of those two, and it's a big spectrum for it to sit in the middle of. But yeah, it's, as I say, huge potential. We just need to make sure we're getting the most out of it.
Absolutely. Okay. So another question here, which is a good one. With the accelerated timescales you mentioned, and the fact that this change is being driven so quickly, and cycles are shortening at all times, is there enough of a timeline to ever pay back the investment in a transition project? Again, pretty skeptical question, but one worth considering, I think.
Yeah, I'll take that one, I think. So yeah, I think this comes back to probably just picking up some key themes that I made in the business case, which is, what is your strategy? Where are you expecting to be? How long are you running your technology for? If you're in-house moving to buyout, then this clearly isn't going to make sense. But if you are an insurer that's picking up the third business now, you're going to be running that for, I remember the old TAS documents. I put in enough of my reports, kind of these cash flows may be running for 60 years plus into the future. That's what you're investing in, right? That's a huge time frame that you've got to be thinking of over. So I think on that kind of time scale, absolutely, it makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense. Matthew, anything to add on that as a wrap up?
Yeah, just generally agreeing with what Gavin's saying, and also probably, acknowledging again that it can be a gradual process and there's diminishing returns. So make sure to tackle the high impact stuff, because that's what ultimately gives you the best chance of getting payback on whatever the investment is.
Okay, that makes sense. And then there's a final wrap up question there. We've got one here which says, do the organizations that have already tackled this successfully, or at least made a start on it and had some sort of good results from it, do they have anything in common in terms of their culture or their leadership or their approach? Are there any themes that emerge from that?
I'll take a first stab at this one. So I think what we're talking about here is a big change project, right? This is going to be we've got a lot of experts in the room that have been doing things for a long time. There's good reasons why each of those bits in the chain is there. I think it's really important to be mindful of that. I think you're then falling back on, what do they do well? What do they have in common? I think one is being able to kind of just articulate the what and the why. So being able to say, look, the reason we're doing this is because we have all of these problems. It's holding us back. So kind of this is the pain we have now, paint that utopia of where we're going to get to, right? Why this journey is going to be worth it, and then carefully manage it going through kind of the guaranteed success formula, right? To find where you are, where you're going, and how you're going to bridge the gap. But I think that's the critical piece. I think the culture and the leadership piece, it's got to be to question. It's got to be have an open mind. The way that we did this before isn't necessarily the best way. If we did things differently, how might that change what we're doing? What are the subsequent risks? What are the subsequent benefits? And just attacking it with an open mind and getting a good diverse set of views on there, right? You need the cheerleaders and you need the pessimists to make sure that you're kind of getting both sides of that coin. I think if you can get that mix right, then yeah, you're off to a winner.
Excellent. Okay, Matthew, any final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, and one of the things that I've seen, kind of not necessarily about things that are in common, but I've seen this sort of implemented from small organizations with a handful of staff right through to massive organizations. And I was kind of thinking that initially, when I seen the question, that it would be something to do with size and it's easier to implement at a small company, but that doesn't really seem to be the case from experience. What it seems to be is kind of a willingness to go through a change project and actually properly think about what you want to achieve with it and set the right things in motion to achieve that. You can see it. You could see it quite easily going wrong if it was just we want to move all this into one platform, but not thinking why you're doing it or not thinking what the steps are to get there. So yeah, seeing it happen at a variety of organizations, but the key thing seems to be just good change management culture and a willingness to make the changes as well.
Exactly, that makes sense. Okay, inspiring stuff. Well, I think that's about all we've got time for. The time's nearly beaten us. We've managed to fill up pretty much a whole hour on that. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. So it just is left to me to thank our panelists, to Gavin Watson, to Matthew Leatham, who've given their time and their insight and their expertise over the course of the last hour. I know these are particularly valuable sort of insights that we can get straight from the horse's mouth. So it's always great to bring together a community to really listen to people who are at the sharp end. And of course, finally, it's up to me to say thank you to all of you for watching, listening. We can't put these events on unless we have people who turn up and make a contribution. So that's always really, really valuable. So thanks again for that. There will be an opportunity to go through the webinar again. We'll be sending out a link that you can click on, and if you want to pass it on to a colleague or anything like that, it'll be available for you. But for now, thanks to Gavin, thanks to Matthew, thanks to everyone for watching, and from me, thanks very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Christian.